right, so today we're going to talk about watershed moments or major moments in Middle Eastern history. And as I said, the first two slides are actually things that were covered by a video last year. And I decided we might as well just cover them in 2 slides instead of taking a whole hour. So if you look on your Middle Eastern review, find the name Suleiman on there. You see where it's at? Suleiman.
Oh, it's like the third one, right?
Third one on the left-hand column, okay? And you're going to write down his information right there on your review. Suleiman the Magnificent was known as the most enlightened ruler of the Middle East. That's what he's known for. He was the longest reigning sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He ruled for 46 years. He was the longest reigning sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and he was known for bringing Western ideas to the Middle East. Just like we saw that in Japan, right? They became westernized, or even Europe, okay? He brought different things, reforms like new kinds of arts, literature. He created an equalized tax base. He wanted education for all people. He created equal laws among all the territories, and beautiful Western architecture really changed things, kind of brought them up to speed with the rest of the world. And if you look at this map up here, you'll see all of this territory in yellow is all Ottoman territory. Oops, there we go. So you remember we have like the Suez Canal down here, right? Okay, so we have this area right here. He goes all the way up over here into northern Africa, up into the Turkish area, and then all the way up even into Hungary and Russia. So we had lots and lots of territory. He also was known for his romance. Remember Napoleon was known for his romance as well? Well, this guy did something a bit rebellious. There was a girl named Roxolana. Find Roxolana on your notes. You see it there? It's in the middle row. Roxolana. Okay. Well, she was actually sold by her enemy into being a sex slave. They captured her and they made her a sex slave. Well, sultans in that day had a harem of wives, right? Lots of wives. Well, she came to be his favorite. And so eventually he ended up marrying her and making her like the queen of the Middle East or the Ottoman Empire. And she became very powerful because he, unlike most men of that day, actually listened to some of the things that she had to say. So that was kind of a famous lady of the Middle East as well. All right. Our next guy is Mimar Sinan. Sinan, I believe, is in the 3rd column, bottom row. See that? Okay. Sinan was known to be the greatest architect of the Middle East, and again, in the Ottoman Empire. He's kind of like the Michelangelo of Italy, right? He would be the Michelangelo of the Ottoman Empire. He designed over 300 buildings while he was around. And if you visit the Middle East today, I guarantee that you will visit some of his beautiful buildings that he's done. You'll see some examples here. The interior and exterior are just fantastic. Tiled mosaics that you see up here. Beautiful palaces on the outside. So Sinan was an architect. Okay. All right. So now let's go into our major notes. Oh, yep, sure, I can go back for a moment. Sure. Oh, yeah, I have a spelling error, don't I? Take out one of those T's. There we go. Got it, Spence? Okay. All right. So let's take a look at some of our major moments in Middle Eastern history. The first one is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And this is right after World War I. World War I ended, and the leaders of the world got together at the League of Nations. This is before we had a United Nations. They got together and decided we need to draw some lines in the Middle East. Remember the activity we did this week? That was basically the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And they drew up those lines, and the Middle Eastern people said, we don't like it. But the Western powers said, I don't care. This is what we're going to do. And they basically just forged their way through. And they were really under British and French control until they were deemed ready for independence. Because we saw Middle Eastern people as not as brilliant or beneath us, maybe. So they were controlled by the British and French. Now, if you take a look at the way the map looked before World War I and after, notice some of the changes. Holy cow. What a difference. Notice the Ottoman Empire went all the way down around here, right? Now they basically have, it's become Turkey instead of the Ottoman, and it's just this northern territory. Egypt changed. Egypt used to go all the way down here, and now that border has changed to here. Notice the Arab area in the center here has now been divided into many different countries. And Persia has now been renamed Iran. So a lot of changes, and a lot of changes that we still see around today, right? So it's kind of important for that reason. All right. 1922, two major things happen. What happens in Turkey? A guy named Ataturk takes over Turkey. Now take a look at his name. What's in his name? Turk. That's the name Turkey. Easy to remember, right? Turkey. Ataturk was the leader of Turkey. He came in and he was considered an enlightened leader as well. He started giving freedom to women. He moved to secularism, so not everything was about religion anymore. He changed their language. He brought in Western law codes. He changed their calendar to the Western calendar, and even changed their dress code so that they looked more like you might find in the Western world. He was considered a real Renaissance man because he was good at very many things. He was very well educated. So on your test, I believe there's a question that says, who are the two enlightened leaders of the Middle East? Who are you going to say? Ataturk and Suleiman. There's your answer. Those two right there. Ataturk and Suleiman. Now also in 1922, Egypt gains their independence. But notice they say conditionally. Okay? They basically can run their own thing, but they're controlled by the British a little bit. King Fuad is crowned the leader, but the British still have their paws in there because they are worried about this right here, the Suez Canal. They're worried that the Egyptians might say nobody can use that canal anymore. And that means we'd have to go all the way down Africa, all the way around. And we want to be able to use that shortcut for fighting in a navy or even trade. So we want to make sure that canal stays open. 1940s, this is right after World War II. The United Nations meets, and they decide to draw some more lines in the Middle East. And it's because there's a group of people in World War II that were picked on all the time, and they really felt like they couldn't stay where they were living at the moment. So they said, let's make a country for those people that were picked on. What group am I talking about? The Jews in the Holocaust, right? Now imagine, guys, imagine your two rows here, okay? Imagine you are all Jews, right? And you're living in South Dakota here, and we're in the middle of World War II, and these people in the room have been killing off your relatives, ostracizing you, putting you in prison, starving you, doing all these horrible things, turning you into the Nazis. How would you feel about living with them after the war was over? Be really tough, wouldn't it? Yeah. Tough to forgive. It would probably cause moments of fighting amongst the two groups. And that's why they said, we need a place for these people to have for their own. So we created the country of, anybody know? Israel, yeah. We created the country of Israel for those Jewish people. But unfortunately, Israel did not exist before this. So we just took an area and we carved it out and said, here you go. That would be like Russia coming in and saying, hey, we're going to cut out a third of the United States and give it to Germany. How would you feel about that? Boo, right? That would not go over well. Well, that's exactly why the Middle East is still like having problems today. Because here's what happened. They basically took that little sliver of land, and we have the Palestinians and we have the Israelis, right? Well, the Jewish people are in white in this map. Notice there's sprinklings of Jews that moved here in 1947. Most are Palestinians. Well, once they partitioned it into Israel and Palestine, The white represents the Jews. See how we have more Jewish people moving here? And now, 1949, notice more and more white. Until present day, look at how much is white as compared to the Palestinians. And so they have been fighting over this since we did this, basically. So immediately, once Israel declares independence, the Arab-Israeli war breaks out, and they have been fighting. Now, if you'll take a look at the votes of the United Nations, when they split these countries into these parts, you'll notice what group was most against this vote. Asia and Pacific areas. These are your Middle Eastern representatives, and they did not want this to happen. But again, the Western powers, the rest of the world just said, you're going to do what we want. All right, 1952. This is like during the Korean War in our country, just to give you an idea. We have the Egyptian Revolution. There were a group of army officers led by two guys, a guy named Naguib and another guy named Nasser. They staged a coup d'etat. What's a coup d'etat again? Sudden overthrow of the government. Good job, Morgan. Excellent. They overthrew and they exiled King Farouk of Egypt. What does exile mean? To kick him out of the country. Yes, they kicked him out of the country. And this is important because this is where British occupation, they are kicked out of Egypt. Egypt now is completely independent. Britain has no say in what happens in their country. Well, at first, Naguib becomes president, but anytime you have two leaders of a group, they're bound to have some problems, right? And exactly this is what happened. Eventually, his buddy Nasser actually forces out his friend Naguib, and he becomes the leader of Egypt 4 years later in 1956. So let's talk about Nasser. Nasser's kind of a famous person in world history. He believed in pan-Arab nationalism. And this is a belief that he said that, you know what, if all of our Middle Eastern countries would unify, we would be so powerful because we all have things in common and we could really make a stance in the world. So it's kind of like a Go Middle East kind of a belief system. Kind of neat. He had very strained relations with Western powers like Britain and the US because he saw how Britain was controlling his country before. He doesn't want that anymore. So he's just kind of getting along, let's just say that. 1956, we have the Suez Crisis. You know we fight over waterways all the time, right? Well, this is the Suez Canal. The US and Great Britain hold back funds to complete the Aswan Dam. Now, if any of you have been to a canal or you've been to like a lake that goes into a river, you might have experienced this, but this is what this dam does. So let's imagine I'm on this lake and here's my boat. Okay? But the river that I want to go into is not at this height of the water. The river is down here. So what they do is they put you in a lock. And so your boat goes in here and they lock the doors. And then what do? You know? Yeah, they let the water out. So it goes down, down, down. So that when I get to this level, they open up the doors and I can go out at that level for the river. Now, if you go opposite, if I come in this way, they're just going to what? Do what here? They're going to fill it with water. They're going to flood it so that then when they open the doors, I can come out this way. Okay, well, that's what the Aswan Dam did for this canal. And we decided we weren't going to pay for it anymore. Well, Nasser retaliates by nationalizing the Suez Canal. In other words, go Egypt, I get to say who gets to be there. And he decided, I'm not going to let you in anymore. Okay? He started by stopping all Israeli ships going through the canal. And remember, we're buddies with Israel. These are our Jewish friends from World War II. So we're not happy about that. Then they blockade all waterways for Israel. We're really not happy at this point. So Great Britain, France, and Israel invade, and eventually the US and the Soviets force withdrawal. All right, 1967, we have a Six-Day War. This is where Israel gets a little feisty. Israel launches a preemptive attack on Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. Now, what does the word preemptive mean? Anybody know? Before something's going to happen. So I think it's important for us to know that Israel believed that these other countries were going to attack, and so they decided we're going to beat them to the punch and get the first attack in. And that's why they attacked. So let's take a look at our map over here. Let's look. So look at, here's Israel, our tiny little sliver, right? Okay. They attacked, started bombing Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. Like all the countries around them, right? Within one day, they had bombed and destroyed every air force in all 4 countries. Pretty small sliver of country, but they're pretty powerful, aren't they? Yeah. They completely destroyed them, and Israel takes over this West Bank area that we put on our map. Remember that? Okay? Now, this is a hugely defeating thing for the Arab people because they're like, oh my gosh, these tiny little group of Jews just beat us like this. Okay? It is a success for Israel, but it eventually is going to lead to lots of wars in the West Bank because this area has 600,000 Arabs living in it in the West Bank, and they are now controlled by Israeli soldiers, basically. So you know that that's going to cause a conflict. And they have been fighting in this area for lots of years. Okay. 1970s, we have a new leader in Egypt. Sadat becomes the president of Egypt. He had actually been a soldier under Nasser when he overthrew the government. And we like Sadat in the U.S. because originally they had been buddies with the Soviets, and he traded that support for the U.S. So we like Sadat because he is buddies with us. And we start seeing trade opening up. We have good relations with Egypt. We also have the Camp David Accords in 1978. And here's where you see Sadat from Egypt. PM means Prime Minister. Israeli Prime Minister Begin shows up. And President Jimmy Carter from the United States. And they go there and they sign the first Egypt-Israel peace treaty. That is a major step because these people have been fighting for a long time, right? They actually win the award, the Peace Prize for doing this because that's a pretty big step. Now, this is a huge victory through American eyes, but from the Arab world, they see this as a complete betrayal because anybody that's sitting down with Western powers like the United States is bad in their eyes. So because he sat down with us, basically, Sadat is assassinated in 1981. They see the United States, Britain as the bad guys because we've controlled them for a lot of years. Still in the 70s, 1979, we're having some problems in Iran. So let's look at the background about what happens and why they don't like us. All right, the first thing that happened is there was a leader in Iran named Mossadegh. And Mossadegh was being kind of a stickler about his oil and not giving us what we wanted. Long story, but that's basically what happened. Okay? And he wasn't doing what we wanted. So we basically helped some rebels to overthrow and kill him. And then we put in our own choice, a guy named the Shah of Iran. He was our choice. There was no election. We just said, put this guy in place. He's our guy. He's good. Well, little did we know that the Shah of Iran had tendencies like Hitler. He took over 500,000 of his own Iranian people, and he tortured and killed all of them. Major Holocaust in Iran. And this is the guy that we picked. It is why today even the Iranians call the United States the Great Satan, because we chose this person and he killed all those people. Well, because of those feelings about the Shah of Iran, a guy named Ayatollah Khomeini that you see here in this picture takes over. He overthrows the Shah and he becomes supreme leader for life. Now, we're not happy about this because, of course, we were buddies with the Shah. This was our guy, right? So we have an issue happen. We had a bunch of Americans at the U.S. Embassy in Iran, and they actually took them and held them hostage for over a year, if you can imagine. In fact, I remember as a young person, we had these ribbons that we tied around trees in honor of the people that were in the embassy. If you've seen the movie Argo, how many of you have seen that movie? Just came out, what, a couple years ago? That is about this event, the Iran hostage crisis. Went on for over a year. They did end up all getting out, but it was really a bad scene. They were really stressed out. All right, you recognize this name. Saddam Hussein takes power in Iraq. He established security forces or police squads to control the country. He nationalized almost all of their industry. Again, that means he controls who gets their oil, who gets trade, who gets whatever. And he also had some real violent tendencies. He collected up the Kurdish people and the Shiites, and he slaughtered them with brutal massacres. We're talking war crimes type stuff, okay? Now this map is kind of small down here, but just as a review, remember when we did our map activity? What was the largest group in religion? Sunnis was number 1. What was number 2? Shiites. What would be 3? Think religion. Christianity would be next, and then the Jewish population. Okay, so that's basically what they're showing. They're showing that Iraq is split among the different religions, basically. All right, so 1980s, we have the Iran-Iraq wars. Well, here's what starts it. Iraq invades Iran because they want this waterway that divides the two countries. And it is truly a war of attrition. They really honestly don't care about the guys fighting on the front line. It is ultimately about killing enough people so they finally give in. And if that means it costs my entire army to do it, so be it. So it was truly a war of attrition. It's also an important moment in Middle Eastern history because this is where we see the use of chemical weapons, the scary stuff, you know. This is also where we see some of those war crimes. Saddam gassed some of his own people. He took the Kurds up in northern Iraq, and he used mustard gas, killing 182,000 people. And that's what you see up here in these pictures. This baby and this woman are being killed by that mustard gas. Total human losses are estimated as high as 1.5 million people during these wars. Now, here's an interesting point to this war. Okay, remember in the 70s, we didn't get along with who? Who held our hostages? Look at your slides. It was the last slide. Who was it? Iran. We hated Iran during the 70s. So guess what? We sent in our soldiers and we gave weapons to Iraq. We trained them to fight, and we even gave them chemical weapons because Iran was the bad guy in the 70s. Now look what's happening. Who's our bad guy? Iraq, right? And now they're using those weapons on us. So it's weird how we kind of get bit in the butt for doing things, right? Because we were the ones that actually gave them those weapons. All right, 1991, we have the Gulf War, our first war in Iraq, Operation Desert Storm. Any of you have relatives that fought in the first war in Iraq? No? Okay. Well, this is what happened. Iraq goes into Kuwait in 1990, and we started by condemning them on the world scene, saying, you shouldn't have done that, naughty, naughty. They didn't listen. So then we put sanctions on Iraq. Anybody know what sanctions are? Anybody know? Basically means that we're not going to give you these things for trade, or we're not going to buy these things from you, okay? So we're controlling what they trade, okay? That didn't work either. So then we sent in forces. We sent in soldiers along with other countries in the United Nations, and we went to take out these guys in Kuwait. It was an air and ground war. Basically, after 6 months, we had destroyed the entire air force of the Iraq war, and Saddam knows that he's going to lose. So his last hurrah was to do what you see right here. He knows that the U.S. wants what in the Middle East? What do we want as a resource more than anything? We want oil, right? And he's like, you know what? I don't want you to have my oil, so no one's going to get my oil. So what he did is he set fire to every oil well along those borders. And I think it took them like 2 years to actually put out all the fires. Because think of it, an oil is coming up from the ground, oil well, right? So as the oil comes up, it feeds the fire. It was horrible. It took them forever. And then they'd have explosions. So to get in there and actually turn the wells off, and it was a mess. It was a real mess. That was his last movement. Now at this point though, yes, we basically forced them out of Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein is still alive. He has still done these things to the Kurds. And this is with President Bush Sr., right? All right, then we have the September 11th attacks in 2001. This was a coordinated terrorist attack by the group Al-Qaeda. These are a group of Muslim rebels. They are extremists. And please understand that not all Muslims are as extreme as them, okay? They started by hitting the Twin Towers. How did they hit the Twin Towers? Planes. They used planes, right? And then they took a plane and they hit the Pentagon. And the last plane was headed for DC. They believe it was going to hit the White House, okay? And that's a really cool story. If you watch the movie United 93, someone just checked it out last hour. They actually know exactly what happened on this plane because they could hear it on the radio. And then they also allowed the people on the plane to talk to their family members on their cell phones. So the movie is totally based on what they could hear on these phones and on the radio. And these people knew, number one, from their family members, that the Twin Towers had already been hit. They had just heard the Pentagon had been hit. And they knew their plane had been turned towards DC. And they knew they were in trouble, right? Because they've already been taken over by the terrorists. And so they know they have to do something. They're going to die anyway. And they actually attacked the terrorists, and they almost completely succeeded, you guys. It is such a hero story. They actually take over all the terrorists in the main part of the plane. They break down the door to the cockpit. They actually get in the cockpit, and they are fighting with the pilot when they hit the ground. So unfortunately, they all died. But talk about a group of people that just tried to do the right thing. It's quite a story. So lots of sad deaths. It's a day we'll never forget if you're old enough to remember. This prompts our war on terror, right? And we are going to go find the people that did this. So our first attack was actually in Afghanistan. We called it Operation Enduring Freedom. We're going to look for those Al-Qaeda people, and we're going to look for the leader of Al-Qaeda, who is Osama bin Laden, right? And we are bombing certain places in Afghanistan where they trained Al-Qaeda. That's why we went there. Oh, I'm terrible at spelling that. Over $150 billion spent by the U.S., 2,200 troops killed in action. It is still going on, and we do not have any major control on Afghanistan right now. You know that we obviously have actually killed Osama bin Laden. His body was buried at the bottom of the ocean. 2003, we start Operation Iraqi Freedom. Look at the name. We went to Iraq, right? Iraqi Freedom. We went to Iraq. Stop. What's going on here? Oh, that's weird. Okay. All right. The reason we went into Iraq was because of WMDs. You've heard that term before, right? Weapons of mass destruction. We're talking like nuclear type weapons, okay? We went into Iraq to look for those WMDs. Did we find any WMDs? No, we didn't. However, I will tell you, I have a friend who went over and fought there 3 different times. And he will tell you that they would get a phone call that said, possible WMDs in the elementary school on this particular street. So he and his crew would go to try to find those WMDs. And they're working their way down there. But remember, you have to watch out for roadside bombs, right? And you have to watch out for what's happening. And they're working their way down the street. And as they're working their way down, the people on the side are talking on their cell phones, right? They're calling people, and by the time they would get there, there would be no WMD, but everything to make one of those weapons was there. So he really believes that they were there. It's just that they could never catch them because the people were calling them and saying, hey, they're on their way, you need to get out of there. And they would always see us coming. So he truly believes that they were there, we just never caught them. So I'm just letting you know what he saw. So what did that do? It resulted in the removal of Saddam Hussein. He was actually put on trial in a world court and was found guilty of war crimes for what he did to those Kurdish people. And he was executed. He was hung. They did bury his body with his family, so you're aware. And stuff is still going on. Now, we technically withdrew our troops in 2011, but just a few weeks ago now, the president has committed more troops to go back into Iraq because we trained troops to stand up for us over there, you know, like for our side to stand up, and they're losing the battle a little bit. So we're sending troops over there to help enforce Iraq again. So still something that may affect you guys right in this room, right? All right, our next event is kind of a neat thing. It's called Arab Spring, and this is a movement of revolution. These people are protesting, demonstrating, rioting, and creating civil wars across the Middle East. They are standing up for their freedom. They are tired of having dictators, and they want their rights. They have, so far, by 2013, forced rulers out of Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. And there are currently civil wars in Bahrain and Syria. So it's kind of spreading like wildfire, kind of like our American Revolution. That's what they're doing. So it's really very cool. We'll have to keep an eye on that. And we will talk about Syria tomorrow. Boy, is that a mess.